Meditation for loneliness. When being understood isn't enough, there's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being ignored. It can show up even when people listen to you. Even when someone nods, responds kindly, says the right things. On the surface, the moment looks complete, but inside something stays unsettled. It's a loneliness that doesn't lift after being understood. You might notice it in the body first. A low, dull restlessness. Not sharp enough to call pain. Not loud enough to demand attention. Just a quiet sense that something important is still untouched. You talk about what's heavy. You explain it clearly. Sometimes you even feel relief for a few minutes. And then later, the same feeling returns. Not exactly the same story, but the same weight. It can be confusing, because everything should feel better now. You did the right thing. You opened up. You were honest. Yet the loneliness doesn't feel social. It doesn't feel like a lack of people. It feels more like a lack of contact with something inside you. Almost as if the words went outward, but the place that needed attention was inward. This kind of loneliness often comes with a sense of being almost seen, as if the outline of your experience was recognized, but the core of it stayed private, not hidden on purpose, just unreachable through conversation alone. You might feel tired after sharing, not relieved, not lighter, just quietly drained. There's sometimes a subtle frustration there, a thought that doesn't fully form. Why didn't that help? And underneath that, something softer, a recognition that the ache isn't asking for sympathy. It's asking for something more intimate than understanding. This experience doesn't come with drama. It's not loud or urgent. It's more like sitting in a room where the lights are on, but the warmth hasn't arrived yet. You can be surrounded by people and still feel slightly apart, not disconnected from them, but not fully at home in yourself either. There's often a sense of incompleteness, as if the story was told, but the meaning was left behind. Nothing feels wrong enough to fix. Nothing feels clear enough to explain again. Just a quiet loneliness that doesn't argue, doesn't demand, doesn't beg to be seen. It waits. And if you recognize yourself here, it's not because you failed to express something well enough. It's because this kind of loneliness isn't about expression at all. It's about an inner contact that hasn't happened yet. One that words by themselves can't quite reach. This kind of loneliness can feel personal, but it's often structural. Not a flaw, not a wound you missed, just the way some inner systems are shaped. Some people feel calmer when emotion moves outward. They speak, release, vent, explain. Their nervous system settles through expression. But others don't settle that way. For them, expression can actually come too early. The words arrive before the experience has been fully met inside. So even when the conversation is kind, even when the listener is attentive, something essential remains untouched. Psychologically, this has less to do with social connection and more to do with how meaning is formed. Some minds don't relax when feelings are discharged. They relax when feelings are understood internally, when the whole experience is slowly recognized, not just named. If that inner recognition hasn't happened yet, sharing can feel incomplete, almost like handing someone a page from the middle of a book you haven't finished reading yourself. The nervous system stays alert, not because it's unsafe, but because the signal hasn't resolved. There's still something vague, unintegrated. So after talking instead of calm, you might feel a quiet restlessness, a sense of being exposed without being settled. Not because the other person did anything wrong, not because you said the wrong thing, but because your system wasn't ready to move outward yet. This is where self-blame often sneaks in. You might wonder why connection doesn't work the way it seems to work for others, why being heard doesn't land. But nothing is malfunctioning. Some experiences need to be met before they can be shared. They need space, slowness, and internal contact before language becomes soothing instead of draining. When that doesn't happen, loneliness shows up as a signal, not an error. It's the system saying, something here needs to be acknowledged more deeply. Not analyzed, not fixed, just allowed to become clear. This is also why advice can feel intrusive at these moments, why reassurance doesn't help, why even empathy can feel strangely distant. The experience isn't asking to be responded to yet. It's asking to be felt into. When that step is skipped, the body keeps the question open. So the loneliness lingers. Not because no one understands you, but because you haven't had the chance to fully understand what this moment is asking of you. And again, this isn't a personal shortcoming. It's a difference in how inner coherence forms. For some people, clarity comes first. Then sharing becomes natural, grounded, restful. Until that happens, connection can feel slightly premature, like arriving before you're really there. When this kind of loneliness is present, the instinct is often to do something with it, to explain it better, to think it through, to find the right angle, the right listener, the right words. But this experience isn't asking to be managed. It's asking for a different kind of relationship. Not action, not distance, just contact. Relating with awareness means letting the experience stay exactly as it is, without trying to shape it into something more comfortable. No pressure to feel better. No expectation that it should move. Just noticing what it's like to be here with it. This can feel unfamiliar at first, because many of us learned that attention is a form of control. That if we look closely, we're supposed to change something. But here, awareness works differently. It doesn't intervene. It keeps company. You might notice the loneliness doesn't actually want reassurance. It doesn't need encouragement. It doesn't even need to be named again. It wants to be allowed to exist, without being interpreted or improved. When you stay with it this way, something subtle happens. The experience begins to feel less like a problem, and more like a state passing through you. Not separate from you, not defining you, just present. There's often a softening when you stop trying to relate correctly, when you stop monitoring whether you're doing this right. The loneliness may still be there, but it loses some of its sharpness, not because it's gone, but because you're no longer standing opposite it. You're alongside it. This is the shift from control to presence. Control asks, how do I make this stop? Presence asks nothing at all. It simply stays. And in that staying, you may notice small details that weren't available before. A sense of tightness that's been there quietly. A fatigue you hadn't named. A feeling of holding something together for a long time. No conclusions need to follow. Awareness isn't trying to solve the experience. It's letting the experience finish revealing itself. Often, loneliness feels heavier when it's rushed, when it's expected to justify itself or disappear, when it's allowed to unfold at its own pace. It becomes more transparent, less mysterious, less isolating, not because it's explained, but because it's no longer faced alone. There's a kind of internal companionship that begins here. Not self-talk, not self-soothing, just a steady, non-intrusive attention that says without words, this can be here. And when that happens, something important shifts. You're no longer trying to escape the experience or prove that it shouldn't exist. You're letting it be part of the moment without letting it take over the meaning of the moment. This isn't a technique. It's a posture, a way of being with what's already present, without leaning away or leaning in too hard. And for this kind of loneliness, that posture matters more than anything else. At some point, when the experience is already here, when you're not trying to solve it or move past it, there may be space for something very simple. Not as a method, not as a way to make loneliness go away, just as a place to rest attention. You don't have to do this. Nothing is missing if you don't. But sometimes, having a quiet anchor nearby can make staying a little easier. One possibility is sound. Not listening for anything. Just noticing that sound is already happening. The hum of a room. A distant movement outside. Your own breath moving without effort. Sound doesn't ask you to explain yourself. It doesn't require clarity. It doesn't care whether you're settled or not. It arrives, and then it fades. You might notice that loneliness can exist inside this field of sound, without needing to be the center of attention. Not pushed away, not covered up, just held in something wider. Another possibility is the body. Not scanning, not checking, simply noticing that you are sitting somewhere, that there is weight, contact. The body has a way of being present, without commentary. It doesn't ask whether this moment makes sense. It just registers that it's here. Sometimes that's enough to give the experience a place to land. There's also the option of a quiet phrase, not repeated, not forced. Something like, this is what's here right now. Not as a belief, just as an acknowledgement. It doesn't explain the loneliness. It doesn't frame it. It simply names the fact of the moment, without resistance. What matters here is which anchor you notice. It's the quality of attention. Nothing tight, nothing effortful, more like allowing your awareness to lean lightly against something steady. If at any point it feels artificial or distracting, that's already information. There's no need to continue. This isn't about staying longer. It's about not leaving too quickly. Loneliness often intensifies when it feels it has to perform, to justify its presence, or resolve itself on demand. When there's no demand, it sometimes settles on its own. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to feel less alone inside. And even if nothing changes, even if the loneliness remains exactly as it was, there's still value here, because you weren't trying to use awareness to get somewhere else. You were simply offering the experience, a stable place to exist. That alone can be a form of integration, not a breakthrough, not a solution, just a quiet signal to the nervous system that it doesn't have to rush, that it doesn't have to finish anything yet. This kind of practice doesn't aim forward. It stays with what's already present. And for some systems, that's what creates enough safety for things to soften later, without being asked to. There's a point where loneliness stops asking questions, not because it's been answered, but because it's been met. Not by another person, not by an explanation, but by a steady presence that didn't turn away. This is where something subtle changes. You may notice that the loneliness no longer feels like a signal of lack. It feels more like a state moving through you, something that comes and goes, without defining who you are. There's often a quiet confidence that appears here, not the kind that pushes forward, but the kind that knows it can stay. You don't need to resolve the experience before returning to your life. You don't need to understand it fully before sharing again. When inner contact has happened, connection feels different, less urgent, less hungry. If you choose to speak about your experience later, it comes from clarity rather than need, from presence rather than craving. And if you don't share, nothing is lost, because the loneliness was already accompanied. This is what changes the meaning of the experience. Not effort, not insight, just the recognition that you are not absent from yourself. When things feel unclear, the nervous system registers this quietly. It doesn't announce safety. It simply eases its grip. Moments become a little more spacious. Not better, just more breathable. Loneliness may still visit. It's part of being human. But it no longer arrives as a verdict. It arrives as a passing state, one that doesn't require an immediate response. And in that space, there's room for a different kind of trust. Not trust in outcomes, not trust that things will change, just trust that you can remain present without abandoning yourself. That's often enough. No conclusion is needed here. No next step. Just the sense that nothing was wrong with you. for needing this kind of inner contact first. And if this moment brought even a small softening, you don't have to hold on to it. You can let it pass, the same way everything else does. Quietly, naturally,